Bom dia. Todos me escutam?
Sim.
Legal. Bom dia a todos. Sejam bem-vindos. Mais um encontro do Tiaços. Tiaços, nesse primeiro semestre, fazendo uma série de comemorações em relação às suas 100 edições. Hoje, particularmente, no horário especial, meio-dia, nós teremos hoje a grande alegria de receber Sulagna Sengupta no Tiaços para falar sobre seu novo livro. Sulagna, bem-vinda. Vou fazer a apresentação formal, depois a gente conversa um pouquinho. Sulagna é uma estudiosa da psicologia junguiana baseada em Bangalore, na Índia. Ela é autora do livro Jung na Índia, publicado pela Spring Journal Books em 2013. O seu ensaio mais recente ele vai ser publicado no Journal of Analytical Psychology em novembro de 23, com o título Repensando a Ecologia, Medidor de Mito e Medida na Selva Nama. É dentro de uma edição especial da revista Spring sobre meio ambiente. Sulagna está atualmente trabalhando em uma interpretação junguiana do épico indiano, o Ramayana, do Departamento de Estudos Psicossociais e Psicanalíticos da Universidade de Essex, no Reino Unido. Animus, psique e cultura é o título do seu próximo livro a ser publicado pela Routledge em 2023. Há aqui uma citação de uma grande amiga, colega junguiana, Susan Rowland, sobre o livro da Sulagna. Susan Rowland também esteve aqui no Tiaços, e eu vou ler que me parece interessante. Através da sua lente feminista incisiva e compassiva do século XXI, Animus, psique e cultura, de Sulagna Sengupta, pega o polêmico outro masculino de Jung e o transforma na lente mais investigativa e reveladora sobre cultura e gênero na Índia. Esta é a pesquisa junguiana transdisciplinar em sua forma mais criativa e fortalecedora. Animus, psique e cultura combina psicologia profunda, Jung, a escola pós-junguiana, mito, cinema, religião e história para insights surpreendentes que colocam o Animus em primeiro plano no pensamento sobre cultura e psique. O livro fornece um argumento vívido e convincente, avaliando o emaranhado de gênero, poder, visão e individuação. É uma bela apresentação da Susan. Eu queria mostrar aqui o livro da Sulagna, Jung na Índia. Recomendo, um livro interessantíssimo, tá? Pela Spring Journal. E, Sulagna, eu também descobri um artigo seu nessa edição especial da Spring, Jung na Índia, onde a Sulagna tem um artigo que é Samudra Mantana, reflexões sobre um mito antigo indiano. Sulagna, seja bem-vinda. A gente está conversando sobre a tua vinda aqui desde o ano passado. Que bom que você pôde ter aceito o nosso convite. Para nós, brasileiros, é uma imensa alegria, porque é a primeira vez que a Sulagna vai falar sobre o livro dela. Quis o destino que nós fôssemos o seu primeiro público. Estamos muito honrados com isso. Espero que a gente tenha um belo encontro. Por favor, sinta-se à vontade. Temos uma grande alegria em te receber. Seja bem-vinda.
Thank you, Marcus. It's an honor for me to be coming to Tiaços with this, the first presentation of the book. And thank you for inviting me to come here. I'm looking forward to this. Let's start. The presentation is in two parts. I'm going to be reading not any extract from the book chapters. I'm going to be reading a kind of an introduction to what I did with the book. And then I'm going to take you through a presentation of what the book contains. So whatever you see today is are just suggestions of what might be inside the book. They are not directly the material that I've used in the book. For that, you will have to read the book. But these are things that that were part of the book's research that I'm going to be sharing with you today. And so let's start. I'll be reading first, and then I'll be presenting the slides after this. So the title of my lecture talk today is Reading Jung, Locating the Animus in Culture. In this presentation, I will share key elements of my book, Animus, Psyche and Culture, a Jungian revision, to show how I have re-envisioned Jung's concept of the animus in contemporary contexts. The emphasis is on the notion of culture. I have conceptualized it through history, myth, contemporary events, and lived experiences. As a result, the book discusses very discrete entities like Jungian psychology and Indian thought. It discusses colonial history and Jung's history with India, which is very different from the colonial history of that period. By that, I of course mean the history of psychology of that period, the Freudian psychology. I also bring inner worlds and outer contexts together. I bring Jung's concept of the animus and the post-Jungian critics in the same frame. I bring the feminine subject, the feminine in narratives, myths, histories, and ethnographies. I bring very, very strongly the notion of the other. Finally, I attempt to tie all these discrete entities together in my conclusion. Reading Jung brings for me association of an old Bengali folktale. Bengal is the eastern part of India. So when I read Jung, I remember this Bengali folktale about an earthen pot that churns out copious amount of food whenever it is turned upside down. The owner of the pot finds himself in the midst of all kinds of adventures wherever he takes the pot. The story of the magic pot resonates in many cultures and has many variations. In it is an image of an alchemical vessel whose contents are never exhausted, and because of the variety of experiences it generates, the pot is extraordinarily vital. Jung's writings have a similar quality because of their many layered meanings, and often because of their contentious elements that they contain, that results in their perennial churning. The excitement that is induced in reading Jung is not very unlike the effect Indian poet-philosopher Rabindranath Tagore's writings have on an unprepared reader. Cultural scholar Ananya Bajpai writes that when I finally turned to Tagore in my mid-30s as part of research for my first book, I felt as though I had opened a secret door into a whole unexpected pleasure garden that I never knew existed right behind my house. The nature of the revelation was so profound that it completely consumed 2 years of my life. In my book, both Jung and Tagore form important conceptual poles for discussion on culture. Both had delved into the concept of self and wholeness around the same period, but from very distinct intellectual traditions. Tagore scholar and linguist William Radice writes, personal, universal, finite, infinite, earth, sky, real, ideal, time, eternity, male, female, west, east. Tagore's thinking and writing revolved around opposites. Jung's view of opposites was something else. He said, the unconscious is both good and evil, and yet neither, and the matrix of all possibilities. This is Collected Works 14. The contrasts and parallels of culture are therefore a running thread in this book. The animus implicates an inner other as well as an outer. The outer context shows how stereotypical heteronormative values are fostered in social worlds. The individual holds tension between these outer and inner and struggles with the chaos that is evoked within. About the spirit of chaos, Jung said, the spirit corresponds to that part of the psyche, the chaos corresponds to that part of the psyche which has not been assimilated into consciousness and whose transformation and integration are the outcome of a long and wearisome opus. Also Collected Works 14. The narratives in this book reflect the self's journey in this wearisome long opus. The context of culture is crucial for understanding the animus and the notion of the feminine in a lived world. The individual's location in personal, social, and historical realms is intrinsic to the psyche. This book, for most part, elaborates on the lived context of the psyche. Jung's description of the animus prioritizes an inner psychological realm, its archetypal essence, and an a priori feminine eros. Consequently, his description about the feminine psyche lacks a dynamic relation with the outer world and its historical realities, and emphasizes a primordial inner essence. While he was perceptive about conceiving a contrasexual other, describing it as important for individuation, his elaboration of the animus and its masculine qualities appears determined not by lived histories and experiences, but by collective gender attitudes and perceptions. The plurality of the feminine self, women's emancipatory histories, the unconscious other that is both alien and yet enabling, social worlds that are constrictive and yet inescapable, are not part of Jung's deliberations on the animus. The question is, can the contrasexual other, especially as it implicates collective gender values and lived contexts, be conceptualized without taking into consideration the individual's interface with the larger world? In all of these, feminine subjectivity is shaped, while sociocultural factors themselves do not constitute the phenomena of the animus. They interact with the unconscious psyche, and they need to be brought into relationship with it in active dialogues. This is the primary hypothesis of this work. In placing outer and inner as heuristic grounds for exploring the unconscious animus, I have discussed the meaning of psyche in culture, Jung's perceptions about race, cultural other. There are two kinds of other, the othered and the other. The othered are the discriminated and dissociated parts of the psyche projected outside. The other is a perception about something that is exotic, unfamiliar, alien, but exotic other that can be absorbed. Jung's feelings of cultural otherness in India held the tension between these strands of otherness, what is othered and what is culturally exotic. I have discussed archetypes, but taken it upside down by not discussing the universalness of archetypes, but the particularity of archetypes. I have brought culture and identity as grounds of experiencing masculine and feminine. Narratives of culture I've used as dialogical tools about feminine subjective self. So there is contemporary history, post-colonial perspectives, cinema, religious ideas, art, poetry, along with Jung's concepts of synchronicity, individuation, and self in deliberating on the feminine and the animus. In all of this, I found the feminine to be plural, non-binary, in tension with normative and linear images of gender in the collective. I found the animus as many-sided, both creative and disruptive, radical and oppositional, with links both to the personal and to the collective. The animus leads us to wider contemporary concerns, or we can say wider concerns bring us to the animus. War, violence, bigotry, race, religious extremism, violence, sexism, casteism, the crisis of modern civilization are all reflected in the narratives of the animus. The social is a compelling part of the person. In this book, I have examined Jung's notion of the feminine, like all other post-Jungians. But in my critique of Jung's position, I have used culture as a primary tool of disambiguating the animus. The narratives demonstrate the plurality and dynamism of the feminine self. Feminine vitality and emerges through a variety of inner and outer struggles across a diverse socio-political spectrum that includes caste, class, nationalism, racism in all social worlds across all geographies. While this book is a narration of India, or many Indias, so to speak, it includes cross-cultural interfaces and implicates the feminine in wider histories and geographies. It is significantly different from what the concept of the feminine is significantly different from what Jung envisioned it to be as primarily eros, with an unassimilated contrasexual masculine as the animus. He also signified the animus in feminine contrasexual psyche as inducing problematic behavior in women. The phenomena of unconscious contrasexuality, when viewed within lived experiences, show the masculine-feminine dyad to be as complex and transformative. I've shown gender constructs as culturally induced and environmentally fostered rather than inherited a priori traits of any one gender. In fact, thinking and rational functions are found dominant in women from early historical time. In ancient India, scholars like Gargi and Vaidehi were known to be professional debaters in king's courts. They were masters of Vedic literature, and they sat in the courtly debates, debating on the intricacies of soul and death and rebirth, along with other professional male debaters in the same court. So this is being there from BC onwards, early AD and BC onwards. So women's thinking is as a dominant function of the feminine is known from a very ancient time. Jung's observations therefore seem defined by narrow cultural parameters that does not take into view diverse histories and social worlds. Can it then conclude that the feminine is of a particular dimension only? While I do not disregard the points Jung raised in his analytic observations, for example, in his case of Christina Mann's mandala visions, he describes the patient's inner condition and life predicament and very astute analytic observations about the patient. I think these insights need to be brought into relation with cultural histories, cultural critiques, class and caste inequities, non-binary gender frameworks, subaltern perspectives. These are universally occurring across the world, and these frameworks are universally emerging everywhere. In a sense, I'm saying that in order to study the animus, cultural factors need to be brought into dialogue as unconscious gender values are operative in the collective. The animus is therefore not merely psychological, but also a cultural phenomena and has elements of the psychoid. It is a bridge between psyche and culture, inner and outer, personal and political, individual and collective. It is transdisciplinary, trans-individual, and trans-cultural. I'm now going to take you through the presentation slides. If I can run through it, let me see if it opens and if you can see it. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, okay, yeah. So the book is called Animus, Psique and Culture, a Jungian Revision. And I'm going to take you through some of what it contains. I have, positioned the concept of animus in a wider context of psyche and history. I have also located it in feminine subjectivity. I have traced these feminine subjective self through narratives, ethnographies, and lived contexts, political phenomena, and contemporary history. I have then kind of, looked at the psyche in individual, social, and cultural realms, context together. I have used archetypes as a bridge to bring all these different components together. But I have also used archetypes in very particular ways and not in their universal essence. And I have discussed a lot in this book about synchronicity as not a personal psyche phenomena, but as a cultural phenomena. Primarily, synchronicity came because this book emerged out of a synchronistic dream. And so therefore, in many parts of the book, the theme of synchronicity comes up. The other important thing that I have discussed is the concept of the other. And the playing field, the book starts with this playing field, the colonial field, and the different colonial players, and how each of them, perceived, conceptualized the other, or discussed what the other is. So there is an other that was there in colonial psychology from the Freudian school. There was also an other that came, the experience of otherness that Jung had in India himself. There is the notion of other also in the first Indian psychoanalyst, G. Girindra Shekhar Bose, who was present in 1938 when Jung came to India. He was present at the Scientific Congress. And his close colleague was Ernest Jones. So there was a lot of the experience of otherness in the field that Jung entered, while Jung himself experienced his own sense of otherness with India. There is also the concept of other that Rabindranath Tagore used throughout his writings, of how to perceive other cultures, the Western world, British imperialism. So there is also the concept of culture and other in Tagore's writings. As you can see, this stamp of Tagore was actually is a Brazilian stamp that came out in 1961. I think around 20 years or so after his, or I think on a special occasion. It's written Correios do Brasil. I think it means Post Office of Brazil or something. So this, Tagore had a very, very special link with South American culture because of Argentina. And he also, I think, came to Brazil very briefly. He passed by Rio de Janeiro, and I think there's a school set up in his name there. So the reason I bring Tagore here is because Tagore and Jung are very important poles in the book about in discussing culture. And I also bring that kind of interpose it with the Freudian interface with Indian psychology in the colonial period. So I bring all these different aspects together to kind of start off with the history. And in talking about culture, Tagore wrote Crisis in Civilization in 1941 on his 80th birthday, on the 80th year. And in that he said, as I look around, I see the crumbling ruins of a proud civilization strewn like a vast heap of futility. I think Tagore was talking of the deep, dark effects of colonial rule in India, and also what had happened in China and other colonies. And he was also at that time quite, but he also mentioned in the same essay his long and enduring friendship with C.F. Andrews, his close colleague and intimate friend, with whose help he kind of built a lot in India in terms of his educational ventures. So he also mentions in the same essay the two sides of the same experience of being with British. He pays a tribute to Andrews in that essay. And Jung's view about all these dualities that are always there is that it contains both good and evil, and and yet neither it's the matrix of, but both approached these dualities of life or civilization from very different perspectives, but they talked about it. And this is a picture. I'll show a series of pictures now about Jung and his Indian interface. I bring this up particularly because at the time of doing that book and the research, I didn't realize the importance that this trip has for a lot of things, a lot of reasons. It's important because probably the only psychoanalyst who involved himself with another culture in this depth and with this much of intensity and interest. So this particular photo, I think one of the very few surviving photos of Jung's presence in India, is in the Ramakrishna mission. It's the Vedanta mission in Calcutta, and it's symbolic because it was a step into another religion. It was stepping into another religious field, another philosophical field that was completely different from his own, and that he had the kind of vision to do it, or the courage to do it, or the curiosity, which many others during that time or even after have not done it with as much depth or seriousness. So it's a very, very important photograph of what his contribution to is not just psychology, but to culture. And these are, some of the many transcripts that I discovered in India about Jung's visit. And you can see the map, the hand-drawn map that started from Bombay and, went all over the country, more than, I think, 3,000 miles by train. It was a journey and a travel of 2.5 months period. And it covered almost the entire country except the western part, right up to the foothills of the Himalayas, to the bottom into Sri Lanka and Colombo. And these are some of the reports of Jung's lecture that he could not do the convocation lecture, but he offered the popular lectures. And these are some of the transcripts. There were many that came out because the Science Congress was covered very well in the Indian media. And so in some of these lectures Jung talked about, this is 1938, Jung talked about psychology as the science of the human mind, not a small thing, but embraces the universe. He talked about different kinds of urges and personalities, introversion and extroversion, life stages. Way back in 1937-38, when none of this was even available as concepts or theories in India in any way. So it was really pioneering. And so these are the two institutions. Again, you see two kinds. This is the governor's house where the celebrations happened, where the convocation and many of the scientific gatherings, the dinner gatherings happen. This is in Calcutta. And the presidency hospital where he was hospitalized for more than, for more than a week. He was in this hospital. So these two buildings still stand in Calcutta. And they're just completely opposite the place where the celebrations were and the place where he was sick. All happened within that same 1 month in Calcutta that he was there. These are some of the posters, calendar art that he collected from India. I show these primarily because the book has got myths about Shiva. And you can see one of the posters here is about the Trinitarian god Shiva. The book has got some very interesting theories about it from cultural historians and Sanskrit scholars, which I have brought into discussion with a Jungian perspective. And this was Jung's last meeting with an Indian on his 80th birthday in Zurich at Kushna, where you can see a little candle ceremony is being organized to offer him birthday wishes. The person who's doing it is Samira Nandi, who was at that time an Indian psychotherapist. So he had gone all the way on Jung's birthday to meet him and do this. So these were some of his last links with India. This was, not really around the time that his last years of his life, yeah. And then I talk about synchronicity and culture, primarily through these narratives. As you can see that there are many episodes that I'll be discussing in the book, and not the ones that I have shown here are all included, but these were all part of the book research, and there were many things that I could not include in the book because the scope, the span of the research was much more than what I could write. But you can see that Maitri Devi and Mithya Eliade is there. So Mithya Eliade is discussed in the book. And Tagore is definitely discussed, and his meeting here is with Victoria Ocampo, and that is again another cross-cultural connection. Tagore, Ocampo, Kesaling, the ancient school of wisdom. There are many historical connections there. This is William Rice Davids. He was like Arthur Avalon. John Woodruff was a tantric scholar. Rice Davids was a Pali scholar, and one of the pioneers of Buddhist Pali texts in India. His life was more or less like Avalon's, John Woodruff's. He had to leave India. So there's a little bit of a narrative about Rice Davids and the cultural synchronicity that brought him to India. There's also this very interesting story about G.H. Hardy and Srinivas Ramanujan that is included in the book, and I have shown how these two people came together. So these were actually people, cultural entities that were completely discrete, opposite each other, who came together in India and abroad because of synchronicities of culture. And you can see Polly I have discussed because synchronicity is in the book. And Polly has a connection with India, so I have talked about that. And here you can see him with the Indian Nobel physicist C.V. Raman. I've also shown something contemporary, Sheldon Pollock, and a league of extraordinary American Jewish scholars who are working on very on very ancient texts, especially the translations of the epics, and they have been with this for the last 2 or 3 decades. So there's a lot of cultural interactions that have happened between India and other people, and continues to this day, not in the Jungian field as much, but outside it in the literary field, in cultural field, the cultural studies, languages, and it's also one of the stories in the book. So basically, these cultural narratives are talking about how synchronicities happen in culture, how these people found these different connections around a period of time where when Jung was also, finding his contact with India. So he was not the only one who had this connection. There was a whole field of synchronistic events that were happening in culture across many different mm, disciplines, from science to philosophy to yoga to literature to poetry to epics. Many of those things were happening when Jung was also one of them, and he found his interest in India. And then the book discusses in large parts, the narratives written by many of them, narratives about them, their life stories, or narratives of that field. Like, I've not talked about Marie Curie, but I've talked about women in science. And because Jung specifically mentioned about women's thinking, I thought it was important to bring Gayatri Spivak, one of the most important theoreticians of contemporary culture. And Christina Morgan, I have discussed, yes, for various reasons, to show how about feminine subjectivity in the center. And these are not the images that you will find in the book, but these are some of the people, some of the characters that are in the book, but there are many that I have not shown here. This picture, like Manubi, I have not discussed her story in this book, but I have discussed stories that are similar. She's the first transgender college principal in India who is heading a university college in Bengal. So her story is poignant in the way she has encountered and managed her personal and social struggles. So I have many of at least some of the narratives that discuss transgenderism, lesbianism, and homosexuality. And so in all the chapters where I have brought in various kinds of narratives, whether from cinema or from myth or from history or from literature or from politics, I have found the feminine psyche to be dynamic, fluid, radical, and transforming. I found it in diverse personal and political contexts, inner, and I've kind of researched them in different contexts, and not just not just one uniform single cultural environment of there are multiple contexts of class, caste, ethnicity, race. So I have placed gender, and I've looked at it as a mixed spectrum, many identities, many experiences and individual destinies in struggle with collective forces and conformist values. I have found the animus within this framework involves many poles, from instinctual, social, political to spiritual. And it is not just in the personal psyche. I've also found animus as a phenomenon of cultural transformation. So, so this is an image of the scarab beetle, which when I was doing the work, I thought this was this represented what my work and the research was about. The beetle has got more than 30,000 discovered species worldwide. It has much more, but more than 30,000 that is discovered. It comes in various formations, from having antenna, horns, fossorial legs, colored shells, not uniform, not same type, not homogeneous. They are foragers, they are destructive predators, they are also helpful to the ecosystem. They are ancient, adaptive, found in many environments. They are also sacred. And I have found that the narratives show this kind of plurality and many-layered fluidity and vitality of the feminine. So So basically, it's a very big, contrast from what the way Jung characterized the feminine and the animus. And therefore, because the feminine psyche is so plural, the animus also comes up with, multiple aspects to it, which have got both the destructive side, and also the dynamic creative side. So this is an image of the Ardhanarishwar. As you can see, the half god and half goddess, which is a very ancient medieval principle of androgyny that has been there in India. But I think the narratives move somewhere from androgynous to heterogeneous. And the image that you have on the right is an art done by an American Indian artist that is about an Aztec god called Zayt, who is both male and female, destructive and a creative, functions in creative and destructive ways. And has multiple principles operating in its heterogeneity. So I think the current context of the animus, I feel, moves from this masculine, feminine, androgynous to a more heterogeneous, multiple, completely, fluid, emergent, but with a variety of possibilities and potentialities. So that's so that's the presentation, and so that's where we can stop this. I had asked Marcus for a 5-minute break. I am okay to do it without break and now. So if you think you want to continue, I can, carry on.
Sulagna, se ela precisar de 5 minutos, nenhum problema. Talvez seja melhor dar uma paradinha de 5 minutos e a gente retorna, para deixá-la mais confortável.
Ok. Ok.
Tudo bem, gente?
Ok. Ok.
Pessoal, 5 minutinhos então e a gente volta, tá?
Yeah, we can start.
Podemos. Vamos lá? Então, Sula, obrigado pela tua palestra, pela tua apresentação do livro. Pessoas já perguntando quando ele será lançado e traduzido para o português. Já temos aí uma demanda de leitura bastante grande. Espero que um dia a gente possa tê-lo em português, quem sabe. Quer falar algo?
Yeah, you have to, I think it's out in summer, is what I know, but I think you have to be in touch with Katie Randall to ask about the translations, because Routledge is handling the translations. So maybe an expression of interest is something that they have their own translation systems and units. So an expression of interest would be helpful so that they can do the Portuguese and Spanish editions immediately as soon as it is published. In fact, Katie and I will discuss.
Vou tentar pesquisar isso. Tá? Pessoal, vamos fazer o seguinte, seguindo o velho protocolo do teatro. Quem quiser fazer perguntas, coloca o nome no chat, eu chamo e a pessoa endereça a pergunta para a Sula. Sula, eu queria começar trazendo uma questão para você, que é a seguinte. Quando você relaciona o Animus de uma maneira quase tornado sinônimo com cultura, me parece que você traz à tona uma discussão que é muito presente no campo junguiano ou pós-junguiano, que é uma discussão entre natureza e cultura, ou entre essência e cultura, né? E eu queria te perguntar o seguinte, você acha que o pensamento junguiano, a característica principal dele é exatamente circular nesse lugar nesse lugar intermediário entre o que é da ordem de uma essência, de um princípio, e o que é produto, formação, representação cultural? Não dá para colocar o pensamento junguiano numa categoria ou noutra. Quer dizer, é possível dizer, por exemplo, que o conceito de ânimos ele é tanto alguma coisa da ordem de uma essência, mas ele também está extremamente relacionado com produção cultural. É possível fazer essa articulação?
I don't know how much of it is in essence. As the way I found in my what is in essence are the archetypal emotions. Mm-hmm. So in India, we have the 9 archetypal emotions. They're called the Navarasas. And in that, one of the emotions is anger. Then there is mercy, there is love, hatred, kindness. So I have discussed the Navarasas as elemental human emotions in the book. And the Animus, if you are looking at its archetypal nature, then it contains many of these essential or these essences of emotion. But the feminine as something very as an essence of something very definite is not there either in ancient India or in medieval India or later. There is a collective notion of what the feminine should be. There's an image of what the women should be represented in society. And it's very easy to kind of start believing that that is what the feminine is. But there have always been in history of women having very different traits from that conventional, stereotypical in every age from a very, very early time. So there has been all the typical masculine functions, like so-called masculine functions like rational thinking, active, independent. All of these have been in history in India, and I'm sure in other parts of the world from a very, very early time. So I don't know that there is anything. If you say there is something essential about the Animus, you have to say there is something essential about the feminine, which is what I am contesting. That there is the essential part is only what is there in the collective as it is defined as feminine. That they make it, very stereotypical and very reductive notion of the feminine is in the collective. But that if that is the feminine, then why so many people in all my narratives, the women are struggling with that, with this collective projection of what a woman or a feminine should be. So these are narratives not of the elite and the educated. These are narratives from indigenous tribes. These are narratives from all across caste and class lines. So if this has been universally experienced as feminine, which is not the stereotypical what we understand as feminine to be in the social world, then that means the feminine is not something essentially a definite kind. It is many. and it can also be, it is not heterosexual only, it can be of other genders, of other identities. So the feminine in this book has been represented as covering a wide spectrum, and from actual writings, historical instances, ethnobiographies. So these are not, and from across the world, India and the world. So I am not sure that there is something, an essence of the feminine that is more a collective social definition or projection. And then there is something like that is changing. No, I think it is from the beginning very broad-based, but it has been socialized into a certain kind of way. So I have examples in the book about women in science, how much being scientific they had to struggle in the scientific fraternity because of their non-acceptance. And this is post-enlightenment onwards till modern day. I saw a 2022 Nobel Prize roundtable, I think a couple of months back, in which there was only, it was the scientist roundtable, and there was only one woman present in that roundtable of all the Nobel Prize winners. And she was asked the question, why are there so few women in science? And this is in USA, in the USA, in a 2022 science panel, where she says that even today, we struggle, women in science still struggle to be accepted. And so the essence that you're talking about is a collective notion of what women should be, not what is, not a woman, the feminine is. Because in our texts, the feminine is represented in a wide spectrum of ways, from being, agriculturists to warriors to, homemakers, to every writers, debaters, Vedic scholars, artists, dancers. I mean, the whole spectrum of the feminine experience is just mind-boggling. So I can't say that there is really an essence of the feminine. There is really a vast spectrum. Yeah.
Sula, só para confirmar, então, nesse sentido, a expressão subjetividade feminina só pode ser pronunciada no plural. Subjetividades femininas. Faz sentido?
Yeah. That's a good point. That's a good point. So I have to use subjectivity as a singular, more as a principle, but this actually includes subjectivities. Yes, absolutely true. Each narrative is a social context, a historical context, a personal context, a parental context, an inner context. So it is really multiple, even in the individual. And then there are many individuals who are in different contexts. So it is subjectivities. Yes, and therefore my problem with defining the animus in a certain way, with a certain kind of, because I found the animus, of course, Jung's observations stand. His therapeutic and analytic observations stand in terms of what he sees about, the dissenting part of the feminine behavior. But I've placed that along with other kinds of behaviors happening within that same field. And so when you look at it in a collective, in a wider context, then the animus looks very different from just the way you define it in very linear ways as problematic masculine, that should not be exteriorized, that should not be externalized. And also this whole thing of putting everything in the, the heteronormative context, man, woman, and marriage is the only. So I've shown various options in the narratives that that show, that represent feminine and masculine. And feminine doesn't mean just women, it also means, in my narratives, anybody who identifies with values of being a woman or of having a certain kind. It can be men. So in my narratives, there are men who have the feminine principle. So, and these are, actual narratives of modern contemporary context, not myths. So it's a wide spectrum, and therefore the animus is also therefore a very large spectrum of many things together. The moment you take it only into the archetypal, and you don't see the social, the political, the historical, the whole gender emancipation, then it becomes very one-sided. I'm not saying that the archetypal is not true. It is there along in dialogue with all the other forces. And then it makes many subjectivities, like you said.
Ótimo. Obrigado, Sula. Bom, vamos lá. Siddhartha, vou ler a tua pergunta, tá bom? Isa, a pergunta está aqui, tá bem? No seu livro Jung na Índia, você relata que Jung adquiriu, em sua visita ao templo de Tamil Nadu, no sul da Índia, um pergaminho que continha uma versão de um jogo ritual, tradicionalmente usado pelos devotos de Vishnu, chamado Paramapada Sopanam, que também gerou um artigo seu sobre o tema. Uma versão desse jogo é chamada aqui no Brasil de Mahalila, ou jogo do autoconhecimento. O que Jung viu neste jogo de interessante? Qual a importância que você vê neste jogo no que se refere aos estudos de sincronicidade?
I can't see the person who's questioning. I can't see him or her. I don't know where.
Siddhartha.
Fui eu, Siddhartha.
Oi, Siddhartha, aparece aí,
Olá.
tudo bem?
Tudo bem? Eu que fiz a pergunta, Sulagna.
Okay. So no, I wrote this, I think, many years back. I took this primarily because when Jung was in Madurai, he picked up this game from the surroundings of the temple. It's a very popular and common game played in India. Even children play it, but a different version of it, a more simplified version of it. The kids play here all the time. We also play with the kids this game. So it actually is a metaphysical principle about the game of the game of death and renewal. So basically, it is they're talking about the principle of how you die and then resurrect yourself, and you rebirth, and you die and you rebirth, and this whole cycle goes on in life, and you face various dangers in the game when you are kind of destroyed. And then you rise up from the depths again from somewhere below when you get your chance to play the dice. And you get a chance to play the dice, you open the dice, and then you rise up. If your time is right for you to rise, you will rise. And then as you go up, again you face more dangers, and then you fall again, and then it's again a descent into the depths. And then you play the dice again and you wait. And sometimes some of the players never get the chance to come up. But mostly, always you get a chance in this game, as I have played so many years with kids and in the family, and you always get a chance. And sometimes you really birth yourself to so well that you reach the final point, which is, the last square of the game, which is the square of liberation. So basically, it is it's a principle that talks about in life you fall and die and rebirth yourself and come. And sometimes some of these death and rebirth processes take you to that place where you see almost like everything integrated into some kind of unified meaning. It's not like a perfect unity, because even in the last square, you know, the last 3 squares of this ancient matrix that Jung collected had many question marks written, you know, symbols written on it. So they have not portrayed this as like a complete liberation that every human who goes through this process will achieve. But it is a question mark that, you know, about where this leads to and how long this goes on and how it ends. So some of the dangers in the game are symbolized through mythological creatures like the dragon and the snake. The snake is a very important part of your going down. You go down when you meet a snake, and you go up when you get a step ladder, you know. So the snake at every point in the game is kind of obstructing your progress. But when you finally are able to go through all that and reach the last 3 squares, you reach somewhere like a kind of an unified understanding of your life. It's not that you reach a perfect unity in your mind, but something like an integrated understanding of the mind. I'm glad you brought this question up. I don't write about the Paramapada Sopanam in this book, but I do talk about the life stages that are there in India, the concept of life stages in India, from which Jung was hugely inspired to write his life stages in his work, you know. So this thing that you brought up reminds me, I think, of the 5th chapter of the book, where I talk about, you know, this whole kind of a holistic understanding that Jung was edging towards when he was kind of nearing his last phase of life. So yeah, so that's all. And did you have anything else to ask, something specific about
Não,
the game?
a respeito das sincronicidades, né? Você, inclusive, cita que o Jung fala que ele viu o jogo dos opostos ali nesse tabuleiro. E aí, em termos de sincronicidade, se você, ao jogar o jogo, consegue ver, aparecer eventos sincronísticos, né? Do que está acontecendo dentro e o que se reflete fora, ao você jogar os dados e cai naquele quadrado, e que está refletindo alguma coisa, que tá, a situação que está se passando pelo jogador.
You know, the way I have kind of experienced synchronicity, I kind of never knew that it was coming. It was most unexpected. In the game, you can actually see, you know, you can see the symbols of all these downward descents. You can see the symbols of the snakes around and you know, if your dice falls on that, if you play your dice and your number falls on that, you're going to go down. And yeah, it could be a coincidence that sometimes you skip that. But you know, none of these things can really be seen from before or known from before. I have continue to experience series of synchronicities, but I can never expect them to come. I never even think about them, but they emerge. So I don't know if this game, in the metaphysical explanation of the game in India, this is not highlighted, you know. But opposites throughout the game in the images, the opposites are very clear. You're going up and you're going down. There's a symbol of taking you up and there's a symbol of taking you down. So this is clearly depicted in the game. Yeah. But not synchronicity so much, as much, yeah.
Obrigado, Siddhartha. Grande abraço. Martinha, querida, você.
Oi, boa tarde. Primeiro, eu queria agradecer a palestra, porque eu achei muito interessante mesmo, muito interessada na tradução do livro, aqui torcendo, né? E, primeiro, muito obrigada, né? Mas eu queria assim, uma pergunta, sobre uma curiosidade, né, sobre a questão das castas, né, na Índia. Assim, e quem é que tem algum problema? Quem é que busca análise? Qualquer pessoa de qualquer casta procuraria uma análise junguiana, há como trabalhar, né, esses conceitos, né, de individuação. Isso, como é que isso atravessa, né? Você está falando sobre a questão de cultura, né? Como é que isso atravessa?
First of all, in the Indian context, analysis is not a very strong phenomenon. So if you're talking of other kinds of, no, because it is still emerging, but for the last, I think, how many years it is still emerging. It is not a very strong psychoanalytic context in India. It is always an emerging context, and it has been emerging for many, many decades now. As you can see, if 1937 was the time when colonial psychology was happening, we are almost coming to 100 years now. And I don't think the context of psychoanalysis has changed in terms of a widespread practice and active and intense field of psychoanalysis happening. One of the reasons is that some of the principles of psychoanalysis are also there in Indian metaphysics and Indian philosophy, and Indian religion and Indian mythology, and Indian literature and Indian cultural tools. So there is a lot that is derived from all of these other subjects, instead of direct analysis and analytical psychoanalytic treatment. It's also there. Bangalore is one of the places where you have National Center for Mental Health. But analysis and therapy, it is a growing context. It is an emergent context, but it is not a dominant context. And it may not become a dominant context in the Indian context. So in terms of the question that you ask, if all of these resources, whether it is analysis or it's education or it's jobs, or it is employment opportunities, or it's access to funds, there are multiple barriers in India. And caste is one barrier. Economics and poverty is another barrier. The rural-urban divide, the rural gets much less access to many things than the urban. There are many barriers to every people accessing all these important things, whether it's analysis or education or training or employment or finances. All of these have got barriers for people in India who are probably not having access to the city, who are not having access to funds, who are not having access to education, and who also don't belong to a higher class. I would say more than caste, it's class. So all of this, and caste is not just one factor in India, it's a complex phenomena of class, caste, economics, funds, rural, urban, multiple factors. And just like in all other fields, there would be barriers. Analysis also, there would be barriers, for people, especially the Western model of analysis, which is very fund, it's very fund driven. And if you don't have funds, you can't afford an analyst. And so I think that it has more economic financial barriers than caste barriers, but caste barriers are also there. I discuss caste in my book to a great extent because one of the narratives is on caste. I think two of the narratives are on caste. And I kind of like to I think that what Arundhati Roy writes about caste as being a dynamic phenomenon in India even today, I would like to think that is true. I think that it is true, although it's invisible. But I also think that a lot of things have changed, that it's not like what it used to be before. So it's not so blatant, and it's not so it's not so active, but it is definitely, it's there. And yeah, and so yeah, so the context in India is very different. Again, the reason I say that the culture is very important is across geographies, each context is different. The Indian context is not a very high psychoanalytic context. We have very strong disciplines in sociology, in cultural studies, in philosophy, in literature. We have more than 650 languages, recognized languages, more than 2,000 languages in total, 40 officially recognized languages. So the diversity of the spectrum in India in terms of languages, culture, caste, class, tribe, geography, ethnicity is huge. And so it produces its own own kind of model of what Jungian work can be in this kind of a place. It can't be something that has happened in other places and the same thing will be kind of replicated in India. It's not going to be like that. It's going to produce its own very original kind of thing that is adapted to this complexity, which speaks to this complexity, which can understand this complexity. And so for anyone practicing Jungian analysis in India, the first axis would be to understand culture. Because unless you understand the cultural context and this very deep, complex cultural fabric that we have more than 4 to 5 recognized religions and many more sub-religions, hundreds of sub-religions in India, all existing together under one framework. So without a deep understanding of this cultural field, and without a deep understanding of India's rural, that is the people who work with the land, the context of Jungian work in India is not going to be meaningful without that. It won't sustain. If you do kind of a Jungian training and then come and do the work here, it's not going to sustain unless you're able to understand and carry all these complexities with you, with a very deep understanding of what all these different cultures are in India. So yeah, so it is therefore I think the Western model of psychoanalysis, in the form it is, as it exists, it doesn't adapt itself to India very well. And this is the reason it is, even after almost nearly 100 years, it is still emerging. It is not stabilized, it is not mainstreamed, it is not it's not a dominant subject discipline. It is still emerging because there are so many nuances to the culture, many cultures here. So yeah, caste is a phenomenon, but there is language. Every state has a different language. If you have to work in India, probably you have to know 3 to 5 languages minimum. If you really want to work deeply and with complexity. If you just want to work with an urban crowd and with one English language, it's going to be a very limited kind of work, because our cultural texts are all in different languages. So if you're kind of reading all that and then imbibing the Indian, this complex ethos, then your analysis is going to be kind of, it will take some roots in the whole place. Otherwise it's not going to be, it's just not going to be that model that can be taken and kind of transplanted here. There's someone who has raised a hand and waiting for a long time. Should I take that question, or do you have anything more to ask? Marta?
Tá ótimo. Para mim, tá ótimo. Muito obrigada.
Obrigado, Martinha. Wagner, querido, contigo.
Boa tarde, Marcos. Boa tarde, Sulagna.
Yes.
Eu não sei se eu vou conseguir traduzir de maneira adequada, né, o sentimento que me vem a partir da sua palestra, da sua fala. Falamos muito aqui de cultura, né? Falamos muito da relação da psique com a cultura, né? Os seus engendramentos. Passa pelo meu sentimento a relação do homem com a natureza, né? A natureza entendida como meio ambiente, né? Florestas, rios, né? E eu penso, né, que há uma psique na natureza, né? Há um feminino, né? O meio ambiente, a natureza, né, como um feminino real, no meu entendimento. Ao longo do tempo, né, ao longo das décadas, né, o homem vem sistematicamente, né, vilipendiando a natureza, né? E penso, a partir disso, né, que um feminino vilipendiado, agredido, ele produz algum tipo de resposta, né? Então, pensando dessa forma, né, aqui é mais um sentimento, uma tentativa, né, pensar um ânimos dessa natureza, né, um masculino que reage violentamente a esses vilipêndios, a essa agressividade, de forma bastante, né, severa. Diante disso, eu gostaria de saber o que você pensa, né, sobre esse feminino enquanto natureza, ou essa natureza enquanto feminino, e esse ânimos, né, suponho eu, existente, né, inconsciente, cuja reação ela tem sido de proporções catastróficas, vide, né, a situação climática do planeta. Eu queria saber o que a psicologia indiana pode nos ajudar a compreender não a relação do homem com a natureza, mas a relação da natureza com o homem. Obrigado.
So the whole the destructive part that you're talking about, the destruction of nature, it is true that it has been described as masculine, because most of the violence, wars, rapes, murders, killings in history have been led by masculine forces. So, but to think essentially, therefore, men are only violent or only destructive or only, killing nature is, I would think it would be useful to separate. There is a real history of this being driven by masculine forces. The whole killing and the war and violence, especially war and violence, and that is also kind of a killing of nature, because and that is mostly led today by masculine forces, and it is also true that in India, the environmental movements have been more women-led. But at the grassroots, there are men and women. I have worked with men farmers and women farmers across Indian villages. And I have not found that only women are protective of nature. I found men also being extremely capable of protecting nature. So there are multiple realities. It is true that current scenario of war and violence is being led by men. It is also true that women's environmental history in India is mostly led by women. But at the grassroots, I have found that men and women work equally for the protection and sustenance of nature. So I think it's a mixed reality, and you can't say that this is a killing of the feminine. It's a killing of the whole human cycle. Is that a feminine principle that is being killed? I don't know if we can really characterize all women as being nurturing of nature. If you put it as feminine, then you have to say that each and every woman is nurturing of the of nature, is protective, is environmental. No, it's not so. So when we put these principles as feminine, masculine, it becomes problematic, because then it essentializes one gender in a certain way. And what we are saying is that these qualities are not gender specific. They are in contemporary history, yes, being led by women in certain directions and being led by men in certain directions. But to therefore say that the psyche itself is gendered in this way, but the psyche is also a product of what's happening in the environment. And if the environment is fostering certain kind of masculine values and feminine values, so the individual falls into that collective trend without conscious thinking. So that is why Jung always emphasized, and this is from the first chapter of my book till the last, the whole relationship with the collective is an ongoing process of individuation. To have all these collective forces, definitions of gender around you, and then try to be the individual that you are, whether the caring man or the caring woman or whatever, you have to constantly be struggling with the collective to establish your own individual ethics, personal ethics, and that can be irrespective of gender. Men can be equally, whether they are is a different question. Whether they are doing it is a different question. But that their potential is there for them to be also equally caring and equally generative and equally sustaining of the earth is cannot, that cannot, we cannot say these characteristics are particular to gender, that women are caring and nurturing and men are not. Men are also caring and nurturing. But social forces are not, do social forces allow those aspects to come up as much? We don't know. In every context, it is different. In India, it doesn't really encourage men to be coming out with their, the feminine and the other kind of aspects of their personality. The difference, it's not that, that conducive in India. But I don't think that in other countries also it is it's much better. You still see men's groups and men's clubs and boys clubs, and these are not very equal spaces, and then you see the pay differences in corporate and any other jobs, the women get paid much lesser. So these kind of discriminations are there across the world. So I can't say feminine as nature, although the myths in India and in many parts of the world talk of the feminine goddess as the nature goddess. We have a lot of that, the feminine as part of nature and the nature goddess. But the gods also are in the mythology, Indian mythology, are also nature sustaining, nature generative, and nature friendly. So that it's not that they are not, the gods are not shown as also as destroying nature. So it's not essentialized in mythology that the gods are destroying nature and the goddesses are not. So we can't take that as very specifically feminine and masculine, because even in the environmental movement in India, there have been many pioneers who have been men. So it's quite well distributed. Although the capitalist forces and the forces that are killing, all the war violence and all the economic forces that are killing the environment are described as masculine. But at the same time, let's not kind of essentialize this as being specific only to men.
Obrigado, Wagner. Tudo. Obrigado. Excelente resposta, Sulagna. Muito boa. Luciana, contigo.
Oi, Sulagna, super obrigada pela apresentação do seu livro. Fiquei, assim, super atordoada, positivamente atordoada. Gostei muito de ouvir, gostei das suas respostas. Achei incrível te conhecer. Eu queria trazer um pouco a história ainda do Animus. Vou até pedir emprestado para o Marcos a frase que ele usou, o Animus quase como um sinônimo da cultura, né? Porque, assim, pensando nesse conceito de Animus, eu acho que essa é a maior dificuldade que feministas, tanto homens como mulheres feministas, né, têm em entender na teoria do Jung. Né? Então, pensando esse conceito do Animus como quase sinônimo da cultura, eu entendo que não existe uma definição, porque se a gente vai passear pelas diferentes culturas, teriam diferentes definições. E aí eu fiquei com essa dúvida de, assim, por que é que estamos usando este nome, Animus? Será que a gente não poderia estar num novo conceito? O que do conceito primordial de Animus do Jung é trazido para essa definição para que a gente possa chamar isso de Animus?
I know, I'm sure that this is going to emerge and evolve into something else in terms of a name as we go on, as we move from here. It may not be this term at all, because this term will not be able to signify or represent all the complexities of gender and sexual otherness that we experience in contemporary world. So I'm sure the Animus is going to reincarnate in another term possibly, but I think it is a little problematic when the concept is going to get lost, because the term can go because it does not represent what is currently happening, because it's a vastly changed world today than what it was in Jung's time 100 years ago. So, and he kind of framed it within a certain kind of experience and a certain kind of milieu, European milieu. But today the work has spread worldwide, and there are many, many kinds of contexts and societies and histories involved. And so this term is not representative of all that is happening in terms of gender and sexuality. But to lose the concept of gender and sexuality, or to lose the concept of the other, the sexual other, or the gendered other, is, I don't know how good that is, because that still is, a nuance of the psyche that is very useful for us in understanding our day-to-day life. however amorphous or however heterogeneous my sexual and gender identity is, I will still have operating within me the unconscious psychological other. And that unconscious psychological other will have, even if it is not specific, an amorphous or a wide gender identity, widely defined gender and sexual identity. You know? For the heterosexual, the other could be the homosexual. And so therefore, because the sexual identity is a very fundamental construct of the psyche, and if someone is different from my sexual identity, my relationship or my images of the other is very, very distinct in my mind. And so it would work reverse for someone with a mixed or heterogeneous or transgender or alternate gender and sexual identity. The narrow heteronormative binary would be the other. But in every kind of situation, the sexual and gender counterpart would be active. Because as human beings, that is one of our, not the only pole, as Freud defined, but one of our very important poles. You know, it is in the human structure itself, from the biology of it to, you know, the body, which has got so many ways of so many kinds of sexual expression. So that is a very, very important pole, and that is not going away now. So, but I agree with you that this term animus is not representative of whatever is happening across sexual and gender realm, across cultures in many places. And the way I have defined animus in this book is that it has to carry the political and the cultural history. You know, you cannot define the feminine and the masculine unless you identify its context. You can't define it only from an archetypal essence. It must have a lived context. It must have a lived experience. The psyche is in a lived context. So the term animus is not representative of all that. So therefore, I have taken more trouble to kind of elaborate on these contexts throughout the book. You know, we can't change the term, because what Jung found was extremely important in terms of the contrasexual principle. And not in a very narrow way of man-woman. I also have narratives which are women-women, you know, men-men. So different kinds of, you know, gender polarities are shown in the book, even within the same gender. And so I think that, and because the animus in Jung's work does not show all of that, all those details, I have taken care to show in the narratives all these differences that the animus signifies, because Jung identified the base principle. But the work to elaborate on it and to really layer it with cultural work and historical work is the work that is in this current description of the animus. And then the animus term is not representative of all that I have brought, because I have brought colonial history to post-colonial critics, to science, to synchronicity, to yoga. I've covered the whole spectrum. And if all of that represents animus, then the term animus, as the way Jung defined it, is not what it is in this book. But again, Jung was the one who actually did all this cross-cultural and trans-cultural work. the only psychoanalyst, if I may say so, who did this kind of work. So what I've shown in the book is also basically Jung, because Jung worked across cultures in developing ideas, you know, and kind of took ideas from different places and really stepped into other religious fields. And this is, I think, unique of Jung. There are many who were not willing to do that. And he could do it. And I've shown how this panned out in the colonial history of Indian psychology. And the Jung in India book is landmark, because only by doing that archival research did I see that all these things were happening. Vis-a-vis psychology, vis-a-vis culture, even understanding that what Jung did was so unique, I came to realize only by doing that book. Because the entire field of scientists and psychologists were present in India when Jung was here, you know, so, and how different he was from the rest of them. So the work Animus in this book is very representative of Jung's basic ideas of working cross-culturally, of working transdisciplinary, of working across religion. But it is also more, because I have used a lot of historical and empirical data. And Jung didn't go so much into actual histories. And he was kind of disconnected from women's history. That's very clear. And I've also done a critique of race and gender. So yeah, so you're right, and the word animus can become something else. But you're right that it's not representative of what Jung defined it as. And therefore, I kind of described it or portrayed it in many various layers of events, of things that actually happens with. So that's, yeah. So it's a very good question, and it's really yeah. But let's wait and see, like, what happens.
Ótimo, obrigada.
Obrigado, Lua.
Obrigada.
Sulagna, quero respeitar o teu horário na Índia, né? Já está tarde. Queria finalizar o nosso encontro com duas questões para você, para a gente fazer um desfecho do nosso agradável encontro. A primeira pergunta seria o seguinte: nós temos algumas cenas da contemporaneidade.
Sorry, Marcus, can I?
Oh.
I think there are people who have raised hands, and I can take questions from, if there are people who have raised hands. I can do
Fábio
some.
José
Fábio
Cardoso.
José.
I can do some.
Eu não tinha visto.
Não, tudo
Fábio,
bem, mas
você
se
botou
tiver
o
na
nome
pressa,
aqui?
botei, mas se tiver com pressa, eu abro mão.
Não, vamos lá, acho que ela quer te ouvir. Por favor, Fábio. Fábio, desculpa, eu não tinha visto seu nome aqui no chat, nem a mão levantada. Desculpa.
Não, mas se estiver atrapalhando o horário dela, eu abro mão.
Não, acho que ela quer te ouvir, por favor.
Eu faço em português ou em inglês?
Português, por favor.
Tá. Vou ser rápido. Uma pergunta geral. O Jung teve na Índia, numa época que muitos mestres espirituais estavam vivos, desde a abertura da yoga e a meditação pelo Lahiri Mahashaya. Ele chegou a se encontrar com pessoas como Ramana Maharshi, Vivekananda, Karoli Baba, ou ele teve alguma experiência de meditação profunda. Eu imagino que isso teria influenciado bastante se ele tivesse experiências desse nível. em que pese o curto tempo de passagem, mas o que tem me intrigado ultimamente é que quando você lê as biografias de grandes mestres espirituais, eu desconfio que eles atingiram profundidades maiores que o próprio Jung como ocidental. Inclusive, essa questão de ânima e ânimo que é ocidental, entre esses mestres, nesses mestres orientais, ainda que a maioria masculinos, homens, ela está melhor resolvido numa impressão muito rápida.
No, you read my book. I don't think it's better solved in India.
Obrigado.
No, but it's, I would say that, you know, the combination of having Jung and then having an Indian context is, I agree with you there, that having the opportunity to work with Jungian ideas in an Indian setting where I am very close to nature, I live within nature, I think that is really something that I value, and I think I would not, it's really special. So yes, but I would not say that is because of, or maybe it is, I don't know, but I think the combination of being able to bring Jungian psychology in an Indian context is, you know, just the Indian context. I don't see that any one school can fulfill all the human, I mean, all the questions, can answer all the questions that we have. So if I can have the Indian context and be able to work with Jungian thought is a very good combination in terms of you know, spiritual consciousness. But I would not say that India has kind of solved all these problems that the Western world is facing. The only thing that right now we are not facing like the Western world is going into repeatedly into wars, and you know, but that does not mean that we don't have violence in the country. And if you read my book, you will see the special kind of female violence that is that exists here, which is again not specific to India. It is global. And I have brought, you know, all the experiences that I narrated in this book. I found the theories for it, most of it, in the Western world. And to me, that was a surprising discovery, because unless the experience is there in the Western world, how would the theories of all these gender and violence and all that come? But I found the narratives have been in India, and I found the theories were in the Western world. Because when I researched, I didn't find you know, similar theories in India, you know, which had a psychology focus. So the experience, therefore it is there everywhere, whatever is happening. Right now, we are not in any war, but that doesn't mean we don't have violence and think that we have resolved things better in India. But I think the context, being in an Indian context, being in the context of nature, and being in the context of working with Jung's ideas is full of potential. And it is it is a very you know, it's a very rich terrain to be in right now. Yeah. So, but I don't think that in India all these problems are solved in a much better way than the West. he did not meet Ramana Maharshi or Marcus I can't hear Isa, but I hope the translation is going on. Okay, okay, okay. So he did meet Ramana Maharshi and he wrote at length about the holy man in India. So I won't get into that. If you just read Jung, you will know why he didn't meet and what. And I think extremely valid arguments he gave. And I have nothing more to add than what Jung has already told about holy men in India. So yeah, I can, so that's what. I can take any other question also.
Vou fechar, Sulagna, vou fechar com 2 questões. Então, Fábio, obrigado pela tua participação, tá? Desculpa não ter te visto. Sulagna, vamos lá. Um certo retrato do que a gente atravessa hoje no mundo. Uma prevalência do pensamento heteronormativo, a subversão das noções de gênero, as falências identitárias, transexualidade, racismo, misoginia, rejeição à diferença e ao outro. A minha pergunta é: o pensamento junguiano tem conceitos que estão à altura dos dilemas da contemporaneidade? Ou seja, o pensamento junguiano, ele tem condições de nos ajudar a entender esses novos fenômenos? Ou se nós não fizermos esse trabalho, o risco é o pensamento junguiano ficar um pensamento datado historicamente? Essa é uma primeira pergunta. Posso deixar uma outra? Só para finalizar? A outra é mais simples. A outra é: o que é a Índia?
So can I do this first question and then we take the other question? So so that is why, so that what I find is that you know, his intuition about contrasexuality was so correct, but the way he kind of went about it is dated. And so there are more and more re-envisionings or revisions needed for not just the animus and anima, but all of Jung's concepts, connecting them to our contemporary crises. And I think somewhere to just work within the analytic context with the personal material, without connecting with the crisis around, probably that is also going to change or needs to change, and or is already changing, or has to change in a much more stronger way. So yes, so that is the re-envisioning that we are doing, but mine is not a definitive and the only one. There has to be more of these kind of narratives that talk about the psyche, which is in relation to the world. So so that is, and it should be coming out from different kinds of cultural contexts, because the historical traumas are also very important. It's not just the personal trauma, but the historical trauma of prejudice, of racism, of colonialism. These are also very important part of the you know, the subjective psyche. So it is not dated, because what he fundamentally talks about in contrasexual, and he makes very, very important observations about the psyche that are relevant even after so many decades, that are powerful. So I think in combination with some of what his his work on alchemy and his work on, the work that he did across studying other cultural texts, I think those are very precious. And so there is not, Jung is kind of, I think, dated mostly on gender and his concept of the feminine. And he's also kind of out of place with his notions about race. So apart from this, I think most of what he says is something that can be constantly, reimagined and re-articulated in contemporary context. And with race and gender, you have to do a completely kind of re-envisioning the whole thing, because the basic descriptions itself are, are not full-fledged. So that's why there was more work for this, but I don't think it is dated. His ideas are dated. Yeah, that's a very good question, Marcus. Yeah.
Você usou 3 verbos aí interessantes: revisar, rearticular e reimaginar. Acho que nos oferece um caminho interessante, né? Tá.
Yeah, no, I mean, even for your continent, the kind of histories that you all have gone through, if you place the psyche across all these histories, I think different kinds of narratives will come out about what's happening in the subjective world. Because, transgenerational memories of what our ancestors suffered and what they went through, I mean, those are also part of the psyche. So, each of these cultural histories have a lot to do with the psyche, and are extremely important now at this juncture to bring all this up for a total Jungian, complete Jungian re-envisioning of his culture. But look at his work. The basic principles are so dynamic that they can be used even in the most different Indian context that I've used. I've used tribal legends and tribal histories, and even there you could see that his basic concepts work can be applied, and it can be contextualized, and it has so much of layers of meanings that so his work is extremely valuable.
A última pergunta, bastante simples e fácil. O que é a Índia? O que é a Índia? E o que é a Índia para o Ocidente? Perguntinha simples, só para a gente terminar o nosso encontro, tá?
No, there's one section in the book where I have talked about, I think it's not, because the whole book is about many Indias, so not one India, many Indias. And to me also, they are not my Indias, in a sense that they are not my stories. They are also my stories, because I live in that India. And sometimes they are, whatever happened in the book in terms of all the violence and the rapes and all are not, or abuses are not things that I have experienced, but they're also part of my radar of my consciousness, because they have been part of the cultural field where all these things have happened, whether killing, murder is not something that I have experienced any of these personally, but they are part of my India and a part of my cultural experience and part of my growing up, part of the trauma that I have seen around me. I have gone through different kinds of trauma, but not what's there in the book, but But so there are so many Indias, and there's one part in the book where I talk about two feminist theoreticians are discussing how there is not one India, and there is just not possible to define India in any one way, because there is a rural, there's an urban, there are so many languages, there are multiple religions, there are men and women's histories which are different, there is colonial and medieval history and post-colonial and contemporary. And so there are many Indias, and the discussion goes in such a way that I have described the animus also, that there are many incarnations of the animus, and there are many incarnations of the feminine. So it's a time where you have to see things in diversity, and be able to hold all these diverse poles together to understand and to get the nuance of it, rather than a monolithic understanding of what is India, what is culture. Even culture, there are many cultures. The definition of culture I have approached through multiple perspectives. I've come from history, I've come from psyche, I've come from feminist stories, I've come from art. So I've come from theory, cultural theories, and they're not all from India. Half the book is about the world, and half is about India. So the whole theme is about multiplicity. How do I hold all these multiple poles together? Because each of them, and not try to universalize it into a monolithic understanding of animus or gender or feminine or culture or Jungian work, which is what I find is the challenge. The moment you try to theorize, you want to universalize. Okay, what is the whole universal theory that's coming out of this book? Whereas what I'm trying to say is that it's all very distributed, it's all very spread out. What works for me will not work for another person in another. And I come from with a specific history, with a specific knowledge tradition, and the indigenous and the subaltern, they come with a different knowledge tradition. And the voices in the book are all about listening to all these traditions, listening to all these narratives and what is happening to all these people in each of these histories, in each of these contexts or cultures. So there are many cultures. India especially is known to be multicultural. So definitely there are many cultures, yeah.
Sulagna, muitíssimo obrigado. Queria te agradecer pela tua generosidade. Eu sei que está tarde aí na Índia, mas pela tua disponibilidade, pelo carinho que você teve em estar aqui com a gente. O teu livro, te desejo, no meu nome, da Luciana e da Isa, toda boa sorte. Você traz para a gente uma discussão que é necessária, atual, contemporânea, urgente e fundamental. Se você usou 3 verbos aqui, reimaginar, reelaborar, e tem um outro, qual era o outro? Reimaginar, reelaborar, recontextualizar, revisar. O Tiassos, ele é muito movido por esses verbos. E é exatamente porque nós somos movidos por esse verbo que nós fomos atrás de você. Porque a gente acha que você, teu trabalho, teus textos, são a melhor ilustração dessa postura. Muito obrigado pela tua presença. Espero que você tenha gostado.
Oh, yeah, I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for inviting me. This is the first of the book talks, as we have discussed, and I will be having several more, but again, in very different formats, each of them. And I had a lot of fun writing this whole book over several years, mostly with the research. And I'm so glad that you called me and I could have this conversation with all of you. Yeah, thank you for your persistence. Yeah, I must say, Marcus, you were extremely persistent. Yeah. Even when I kind of didn't respond to mails and all, you were extremely persistent, and I really, really appreciate that. And I thank you for, pursuing the idea.
Pouco de chatice também faz parte, então eu fui lá perturbar. Mas eu faço isso bem, particularmente eu faço isso bem. Obrigado, Sulagna. Bom fim de semana para você. Espero que nós possamos nos rever numa outra ocasião em breve.
Yes.
Pessoal, obrigado pela presença. Lu, dia 24, né?
Cauched.
Dia 24, teremos Donald Cauched falando sobre a clínica do trauma. Sejam bem-vindos. Obrigado. Novamente, um grande momento de teatro. Obrigado, Sulagna. Isa, querida, beijo. Parabéns pela tradução. Lu, beijo a todos. Até lá.